Welcome to the Natural Doctors webinar tonight. We are really excited to talk to Peter Jackson-Maine, who is a practicing herbalist and naturopath. He's an iridologist and he's course director of herbal medicine at the College of Naturopathic Medicine, the CNM. Welcome, Peter.
Hello there. Hi, both of you. Great to be here.
Great, thank you. So my first question really is, what is iridology?
That's a very good question. Well, the iris, from which iridology gets its name, is a small piece of tissue, one in each eye, and it's actually very complicated and it's a very complex structure and a little understood one in terms of what we might call conventional science. Nobody really knows what it's for, other than as a sphincter and dilator muscle, which regulates the amount of light that gets into the inner eye chamber. But nobody's really explained from what we might call a mainstream perspective why it is so individual and so complex, because one eye is literally not the same as any other eye in the universe. That's a bold statement, but we could I think with a lot of justification, say that it's a truly individual bioidentifier of each of us, and we each have two, of course. So this is a way that we have of, it stems from the late 19th century, actually, the practice of iridology, where it was assumed to be rather more kind of literal than we now see it. It was assumed that the markings that we found in the iris could somehow lead us to a diagnosis of actual illness. And it was found after some years, decades of experimentation, that this didn't work as well as we thought it should. And so another explanation was called forth from a German doctor, actually, called Joseph Deck. And he surmised and pretty much proved through his work that it could be an indicator of inherited genetic health traits, risk factors, susceptibilities, etc. So we use it as an indicator of what we call the constitution of the individual. So I think what we're going to talk about is how we actually see that reflected in the color and the structure of that of the iris.
So I suppose that might have some sort of relationship to kind of epigenetics. Is that right? So if you like a predisposition, so that means that if you are predisposed, you can see it, you could effectively turn it on?
Exactly, and it's all about the science, if you like, or the method of iridology is to predict how and when a patient might turn on their inherited risk factors by their lifestyle, actually.
Yeah. So it links really nicely to lifestyle medicine then. So basically, if you're good with your lifestyle, you can keep a bit at bay, and if you're bad with your lifestyle, not so much.
And how long would changes take to show in your eye? So if you, for example, had something in your eye that was changing, if you had a genetics that had turned on or turned off, would you see changes in the eye itself?
Not really. There are some things that are turned on that you can see happening. Very interesting phenomena, actually, that we haven't really got to the bottom of yet. One of the problems with iridology is that from a mainstream perspective, there's not a lot of money to put into researching it. There is one geneticist and embryologist I know who's doing a lot of work on it. We might mention that later, because the other thing that iridology can tell us about is our personalities and temperaments as well, which of course is a big part of our health risk factors too. But the issue of change in the iris is very controversial, because since the advent of decent quality photography, it's been almost impossible to prove what they originally thought which was that, if you get better, a change that looks like a disease, a sign that looks like a disease sign in the iris will disappear or somehow change. And that really doesn't happen. So when you say, is it to do with epigenetics, it kind of is. But it's kind of deeper than that as well, because the structure, the actual placement of the features and the fibers that make up the eye is pretty much set from soon after birth. It's not set at birth. You can actually watch the iris sort of developing in the first few weeks of life. But once it's achieved that structural pattern, that will be stable till the end of your life. There are some things that do change. I mean, you'll know about what we call it, the lipemic annulus, usually known as the cholesterol ring, which I think is medically recognized as a sign for ischemic circulatory disease. So there are a few things like that that can come into the picture, and there are some random things actually. I don't know whether you knew this, but there is quite frequently we find during the adolescent years an iris that really is not pigmented like mine, blue eyes, will suddenly start to develop very, very small deposits of pigment. And again, we have our theories about what that might be about, but nobody's ever really.
Like brown flecks, yeah?
Brown flecks, yeah, brown, orange, red, and we think that this is to do. We think it's still somehow genetically determined, and maybe linked to the sort of development of, or the kind of timed release of genetic. Genetic factors at that time of life. It's a time where we're growing a lot. We've got
maturing, aren't we?
Yeah, exactly. And I think they're often, interestingly, they're often associated with more emotional things as well. So again, that time of life is where we're really kind of wrestling to some extent with a lot of emotional material and coming to know ourselves a little bit. And those markings can very often serve to remind us actually of certain key concerns that we might have emotionally in our lives as well.
And how did you first get into iridology? How did you first get into this?
Very long time ago, because I did a degree at Cambridge University. It was nothing to do with any kind of science at all. It was English literature. And when I came out, there weren't any jobs or anywhere to, it was the 70s, and there was no jobs or anywhere for people like me to go. So, and I wasn't very well because I'd sort of spent my time sort of powering myself up on ludicrous amounts of caffeine and tobacco in order to get through the course. And so somebody pointed me in the direction of a naturopath when I got out, and it was sitting in her office, and having my eyes read and being given a basket full of strange herbal preparations to go and take, that my practitioner said to me, "What are you going to do with your life now you're out of university?" I said, "I have no idea." And she said, "Well, why don't you come and study with me? I'm doing a few workshops." And that's really where it started. So it started in a very sort of small, and I had no intentions or no designs to become a practitioner at all. But as I went through her training, and then I picked up on other bits and pieces, it just took me over. And the other thing that happened, which was really important, was that from feeling not very well and from having visited doctors again and again and again and getting no real answers to the questions I was asking and the symptoms I was experiencing, she pretty much sorted me out in 3 weeks flat, and I was very impressed.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, I think that's we tend to notice, isn't it, with natural health? You start taking the herbs and vitamins, and it's amazing how fast you feel kind of that wellness, isn't it? I mean,
it's not just symptom suppression.
No, that's it. Because you can go in for a symptom, but I think natural health, sometimes it just gives you so much more. You go in with one thing and it just makes you generally feel better. And that's such a fantastic thing that you start seeing yourself as a whole. I have a little question myself, actually. You just said that the iris develops in those first few weeks after birth. Is there any relationship to, that's a very, very important part for health, those first few weeks. Is there any relationship to if, something is changed during those weeks, or you're not quite as healthy in those first few weeks? Could that make any difference?
Yeah, I mean, this is uncharted territory, really. So I could offer an opinion on it without being able to claim that it is.
We don't need a scientific.
No, it's your opinion. I want.
I think personally that there are two directions from which the iris develops. One is genetic and the other is embryological. And when we say embryological, we're talking about the experience in the womb and the things that happen in the womb that we do know influence what happens to the iris itself and the eventual shape that it takes. My feeling is that that process is not finished when we're actually born. At the moment of birth, that we're still developing to some extent. We're still sort of, if you like, it's almost like when you look at the iris during that period of life, it's as though they're coming into focus. It's like they're all blurry.
But their eyes are like that. They're kind of magical, aren't they? I don't know.
Yeah, they really are. And all babies are born with blue eyes, dark blue eyes. And as you look, it's almost like the structure just sort of comes into focus, and it'll tell you very quickly within a couple of months, actually. Not so it's a few weeks. And if it's a blue eye, you'll see very clearly and very, very, very early on that it's going to be a blue eye. If it's a brown eye, that might not be so obvious until later, except with the pure dark brown iris type, which is the Asian and African type, where that also will be obvious fairly soon.
Yeah.
But there is the in-between type, because if you think about iris color, there's blue eyes and there's brown eyes, and that's never the twain shall meet, so to speak. And there's also green eyes, which actually are not. Green is not a real color in the iris. Green is always a mixture of an underlying glow.
Green.
Yeah, hazel we call it, blue green, hazel, brown green, etc. So those kind of eyes, sometimes a child can actually have blue eyes until they're about 5 or 6 years old, and then that extra pigmentation will arrive.
Oh wow!
Wow, yeah. Gosh,
it is amazing. We always see that because we treat a lot of pregnant women and we see the babies afterwards, and we always find it interesting that when we've had mum on a huge amount of vitamins and minerals and getting really healthy during that pregnancy, the baby's eyes are completely different. They're just almost glowing, and you can almost exude that health. I always think if I can see if I see them, a mum who I haven't seen during pregnancy, but I suddenly start treating the baby, and I always find it interesting that they're kind of dull when they first start seeing me, and we struggle a bit more to get them into that glowing stage, but they can get there. I'm assuming that is a version of kind of seeing that health in their eyes.
I think so, yeah. I mean, there's a lot about the eye which is very, if I use the word subjective, I don't want to be dismissive about that, but there's something undefinable about the quality of the eyes. I think it's been said often enough, they're the windows of your soul. So literally, the soul is looking out through these incredible structures. I sometimes say the iris is the window frame of the window of the soul. But it is, there's a lot of information that we get, eye to eye with eye contact, for example, where we're seeing a person in ways that perhaps we're not even conscious of. And I use this technique in iridology all the time, because my first rule when I see a person and I read their iris for them is to just be really quiet and open to what presents itself. So I don't rush in to analyze. I want to sort of get an impression of what the eye is saying to me, almost, and then I can bring my rational mind in and we can start to work things out and go through the story. But a good iridology reading is also a journey that we take a patient on to understand themselves. So it's not all about diagnosing people so that the expert can roll out the right remedy. It's also about helping people to understand their health issues and understand the symptoms that they've got are part of a greater whole.
And do you then link that to your treatments? Do you link it to your naturopathic and herbal
Absolutely.
treatment?
Yeah. Absolutely, we do. And if you say, we could have a look at some of the slides that I sent you, for example, and on a very, very simple level, the color of your eye will tell me some quite important things about the background to your health. So these are the three colors that we talked about earlier. On the left hand, we have the blue or blue-gray iris. The official name for that is lymphatic, and the lymph system is all about tissue cleansing and immunity, and that's basically the kind of concerns that we see in the type. And because the blue eye is more prevalent in a northern cooler climate, geographically speaking, we find that there's an emphasis on what we call maintaining the heat of the body, for which we might also read vitality and also immunity, because you can't afford to let your defenses drop when you're not getting a lot of energy from the environment. So that, we think, is part of the sort of rationale, because pigment, if we go to the right hand side there for the very, very dark brown iris, this is the kind that predominates in hotter parts of the world, and the pigment is melanin, which is the same pigment as you get in the skin of dark skinned people. And but pigment blocks out light. That's what it's for. It's to stop the sun actually damaging your skin. And it does the same for the iris too. But by the same token, it also sort of slows down the light as it enters not the eye, but the iris itself. We think that at the back of the iris, there is a kind of a photochromic plate, really. Again, the science hasn't been done on this, but it always used to be said that the iris in itself is a kind of a receptor for light in general, and part of that might actually be, when we look at the map in a moment or so, we'll make more sense of this, that the eye actually, or the nervous system, because the iris itself is actually nervous tissue. It belongs half to skin and half to nerves, and the nerve system actually gets some stimulation through light hitting the iris. This is one of the theories that underpins iridology. So if you've got a big thick kind of layer of pigment, that's going to sort of slow that down and stop it happening so much, because of course there's a lot of light, you don't want to be overstimulated. Then we have the in-between type. Now, I'll just say that the dark brown iris type is all to do with blood and blood composition. And I don't know whether you can verify this. You may well already know this, but in the countries where this type predominates, we do get a lot of diabetes, for example, which is all, big blood composition disorder. We get a lot of high cholesterol, and we get a lot of high blood pressure. And those are the three main pathologies that this type will tend to be susceptible to. And then we got the middle type, which is the mixed type, and this is all about digestion. If in a moment when we look at the map, you'll see that the digestive organs are around the pupil, very tightly arranged around the pupil. You can have a look if you like.
Is it that one that you want? No, a second. This
one? That one, yeah.
Yes.
It might be a little bit small for people to see, but if you can sort of screw your eyes up and have a look. In the central, if you can make it bigger, in the central ring right around the pupil, we have the stomach and the intestines. And again, this slowing down effect of pigment is almost like a graphic representation of the fact that in this type, the provision of digestive secretions, the exocrine secretions, is not as enthusiastic as it might be in the blue-eyed type. So we tend to get symptoms related to sluggish digestion, indigestion, epigastric bloating, constipation, and it's all signs that basically digestion is not as vital as perhaps we'd like it to be. But again, we're not saying that there's something wrong with people who have this. We're saying that they need to learn how to live their lives. And it applies to all three types. We all have to learn how to live our lives so that we optimize what capacity we have. So for the mixed type person with the green hazel type eyes, there's nothing wrong with them. They can be perfectly healthy, but they just don't want to eat like a person with blue eyes, because if they do, they're going to get overwhelmed quite quickly. Blue-eyed people
in that area.
Yeah, exactly. So we use this. This is very simple. I mean, obviously these are large categories because there are only three types, and there are 7.5 billion people on the planet. So these are large categories. And by the way, the largest category of all is the dark brown. They account for about 60% of the world's population. But it's a base to start from. So if you have like what we call the hematogenic type, the very dark brown iris, we know immediately that anything that they're doing in life which is not so good for their health is likely to go in that direction. It's likely to impair blood composition and give blood related or circulatory related disorders. And in fact, I talked to you just before we were on about another thing that you'll know about, the cholesterol ring, we call it, which is the white arc that some people have in their eyes. Again, much more frequent in the dark brown iris type and comes into the picture earlier. So whereas we can all develop a cholesterol ring, I could develop one. I haven't got one actually. The rest of my family have. I haven't. That's a bit of epigenetics for you, because I've lived naturopathically for 45 years. Everybody else in my family has a cholesterol ring, although they mostly have blue eyes. But in the brown eye, it can come in as early as the 20s.
Gosh, wow.
Yeah, you do see the higher cholesterol. You do see that side come in much earlier. It's very interesting. So then would you think when you were seeing a patient, that if you're seeing problems in them, you'd be more likely to put herbs in to support that area?
Yeah.
Depending on the eye color. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And it's also a question of thinking about, because a patient may not come in because no patient comes in saying I've got, blood composition problems. They might come in saying I've got diabetes, but usually they're going to say something like I'm tired all the time, or I have digestive bloating, or I have stress, or whatever. And then part of the job of the iridologist, I think, is to look at the constitution. And again, we've only looked at color, and there's a lot else to look at as well. And say, how does that tendency in this person feed into the symptom that they've got? In what way is that symptom related to what I can see in the iris that describes the constitution? Because if you think about it, blood that's not well nourished, blood that's thick and hyperviscous, not carrying so much oxygen maybe, is going to make you feel tired.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, sluggish.
Basically, it'll be exactly how it is, isn't it? It'll be slow.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Excellent.
Should we move on to the next
Do you want
slide?
me to put you on to the next one?
Yeah. So we looked at color, and then I just want to say I could say a lot about this, and I know we haven't got that much time, so I can't really do as much as I want to.
It's too exciting, unfortunately.
Structure, and we've got a variety of colors here, so I want you to ignore the color for this one because it's not relevant, because what we're looking is the pattern that the fibers, the eye's made up of myriad of tiny little fibers that run out radially, and you know, the sort of, when you draw an eye, you usually draw it with those little lines going going from the pupil out towards the edge. And if you look very, very carefully, you can see very, very different patterns emerging here. So on the top left here, we have what we call the neurogenic, very, very high density of fibers. And this is the type, we call it neurogenic because literally these types live on their nerves. So when we get to the dimension of structure, we're now talking about almost behavioral characteristics of people, how they use their bodies, how they approach life, and how that in itself can be a factor in whether they're healthy or not. So somebody who lives on their nerves for long enough without replenishing the nutrients that the nerve system used up is going to crash at some stage. They're going to maybe end up even with neuropathies of one sort or another. Okay, so they're exhausting their nerve systems. So they're very strong types. They can go on and on and on and on, but eventually they're going to hit the brick wall like the rest of us, because they simply, they're overdrawing, if you like, on their own reserves. Now, next to that, we've got a very, very different picture. We've got a low density iris. And although you might think this is a weaker type, we've got openness, we've got easily invaded might be a way that we would describe them, whereas the neurogenic ones are very high resistance. This type is low resistance, so something comes along, it gets in easily, and it causes, like pathogens, for example, cause havoc much more easily in this type. But actually they make up for that because they have this kind of inherent awareness of their own limitations, which means that they take evasive action. They don't put themselves in the way of trouble like the neurogenics do. They back off, they eat sensibly, they rest, they make sure they get enough sleep, they make sure that they're looking after themselves appropriately. So although nominally they are weaker, and it does, by the way, sometimes this type will be found to have things like hypermobility and actual signs of connective tissue weakness or connective tissue, less robust connective tissue. But they make up for that by being incredibly flexible and adaptable in their behavioral nature. Yeah. And there are the other size types that we can see here too, the glandular type, which is all about emotions. And these people sort of govern their lives from the gut, so to speak. It's all about what they feel. Oh, I want to do this now. Well, you can't, says the neurogenic. You've got to do this. No, I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. I don't want to sit in front of a computer or work in an office. I want to go and lie on a beach or walk in nature or whatever. So they're very impulsive and very spontaneous about the way that they run their lives. And then we've got another one, the one on the bottom left there, it's got a funny name, larvate tetanic. There are all sorts of very odd names for this one, which I won't repeat because some of them.
It's like it's embedded in furrows.
Yeah.
It's this. The word larvate comes from the same word. It means a mask, actually, in the original Latin. And tetanic's the same word that we get tetanus from, which is lockjaw. So it's about rigidity and spasm, muscular spasm. And the dynamic with this type is that they do experience a lot of neuromuscular tension, particularly around the shoulder girdle and the back, and they're always tight. But they're doing it because
chiropractic patients.
Their body is saying the world is a dangerous place. Watch out, brace for it. Okay, so they're on a kind of high alert the whole time.
It's almost like they've had a trauma past, isn't it? It's almost like they've had trauma.
And they do. When you see somebody with an iris type like this, and they've been through a really heavy trauma in their lives, you know that trauma has been stored in the body. They've not been able to let it go.
Interesting. Wow, that's amazing. And the last one?
And the last one is a gastric type. Does that say?
Yes, gastric type's very similar to the glandular type. Again, they hold stuff in the digestive area particularly. And so what we've got here basically is connective tissue weakness or loose connective tissue, but in the digestive tract specifically. So I've seen this very often associated with, well, particularly with Crohn's disease, actually. I'm not saying this is a Crohn's subject, it's not, but a lot of Crohn's patients do have this, this type. And this is all about susceptibility and I'd say sort of immune dysfunction affecting the gut. So we might be looking at dysbiosis, for example, disturbance of the microbiome here. I know that's a very, you know, there's a lot more people who suffer from that than have this constitution. But if you have this type, then it's a higher risk factor. It's a higher risk factor for parasitic invasion, for example, as well.
That's very interesting. And do you take pictures of all your patients' eyes then? Is that what you would take it as a photograph? Yeah.
Can you go back full screen? So I've got a question now. So I'm a strange type because clearly I am very, very, very pale skin. I'm definitely an English rose, but I have nearly black eyes, which is, I would say, quite an odd mixture.
Yeah.
I was trying to look at it. I can't see anything in your eye. It's so dark.
I would love to take photographs of your eyes, Xandra. I am very fascinated by this. I see a lot of people in Ireland with that pattern. Have you got an Irish heritage at all?
Not at all. I'm literally
Scottish. We've got a lot of Scottish blood in us.
Scottish. Yeah, but we're really not very. I don't think there's. I think we tested it genetically. I'm like 99.5% like from here.
We've got a little bit. We've
Really?
actually we've got a little bit of African, weirdly, in there.
Well, there you go. So that may be African throwback.
About
actually.
these eyes 5 generations back.
But these eyes came from the other half of the family.
Oh yeah.
Oh.
It came from my dad's side of the family, and actually,
and so you've this brings up something very interesting, because this is something I actually want to do at some point, which is a research project based on comparing the results of genetic screens with iris phenomena, and it's a project begging to be done, but I just don't have the time or the funds to do it.
23andMe results and other things to tell you.
Yeah, it would really be a nice one. So if you're saying that you're 99.9% absolute from the British Isles, that's a puzzle. That really is a puzzle, because
it's more a puzzle because also my entire family are brown haired.
Yeah,
I look like I'm adopted in all pictures because I'm the one with
Okay.
these very dark eyes, very, very pale skin, and very blonde hair. It was only because my grandfather died so young we hadn't realised it was him.
Sometimes there's a connection to the Rom people with dark eyes and fair skin as well. I've seen that quite a lot. But no, I mean, I don't have the answer to everything, I'm afraid.
You struggle to see anything.
When I meet somebody like you, I'm like, get my camera out.
That's my question really is. I'm assuming when you use the camera and you shine more light at the eye, you can then see more information.
Yeah. We have a special lighting. My rig has a special lighting setting that is very, very good at taking pictures of very dark brown eyes.
That was my question.
I
Really.
might shine a light in your eye and we'll take a picture.
Great. That sounds like a lovely project we're doing later. We've got torches shining at my eyes with no people left. Wondering what's going on. I was very, very concerned. I was really thinking about that all. And I would say, actually, hypercholesterolemia does run in my family. Yeah.
Well,
which I find interesting. But actually, due to lifestyle and everything, mine's fine. And also blood pressure, everything, always low. No problems with that. But it's interesting that the side of my family that aren't as healthy, I would say, do generally stick with very high cholesterol.
Yeah, I do notice also. I don't want to worry you, but I do notice. I do a lot of these fairs, like go around, Mind, Body, Soul, and things like that. And a long time ago, I decided, because I was working in a part of London where there's a high volume of people coming in who are Afro-Caribbean or Asian, and I decided to start asking everybody the same 3 questions, which were: do you or anybody in your family suffer from either diabetes or blood sugar problems, cholesterol or circulatory issues, or high blood pressure? And I was getting like a 2 or 3, a positive on 2 or 3 of those in the hematogenic component, and much, much less in the others. But what I noticed was a lot of them would say, no, my blood pressure's low, my blood sugar's low, my cholesterol is low. And then I'd say, well, think about your mum, what's she like? And she'd say, yeah, her blood pressure actually went up really suddenly when she was 45 years old. And I'm saying, what's your blood pressure? Because it can start off very, very low. One of the things we say about the dark brown iris type is that the pathologies, if you like, are all late onset. And before that, you're compensating, bumping along the lower levels like nothing's going to happen. And then suddenly, wham, it goes up just like that. But, if you're paying attention to your lifestyle, your diet, that doesn't have to happen.
Well, I think that's why we do, because, it's interesting that because of our family history, we very much pay attention to those things, because heart problems is very high. So we've always paid attention.
Tells you where your weak
10
points
years.
are, though.
Yeah,
And mine is in
amazing.
my digestion. I have the hazel eyes. It's interesting because my weak point is definitely where my digestion.
Yeah,
I had an operation and got leaky gut after it, and it's interesting, almost straight
Right.
after. And I think we definitely have different tendencies because of our eye color. Interesting.
It's amazing. Brilliant. Well, that was absolutely fascinating, Peter. Thank you very much. I could talk to you for about another hour. That was great.
I feel the same. I could go on and on. My students are always
Really
commenting on this as well.
Well, very much we'll invite you back. But thank you very much for joining us today. That was fantastic.
Pleasure.
And we can't wait to talk to you again soon.